Hey guys, welcome back to Horsetooth Cinema. And today I'm going to be reviewing Wolfman. This just came out a couple of weeks ago and it was directed by Leigh Whannell. I think Leigh Whannell is one of the most interesting directors we have at the moment in terms of kind of how he came to develop his own unique style. He started out as a writer for James Wan with films like Saw, and then made eventually a pretty successful turn to directing. He has a really unique blend, I think, of action and horror sensibilities and the way that he kind of blends them together, especially with his camera movement, is something that I don't think you really see too often. I think a lot about the shots in Upgrade where like the AI takes over and the guy's body does this very sharp movement up and the camera sort of follows it very symmetrically. It has this almost like mathematical quality to it without being too like erratic in the camera movements, but it's still very like kinetic. His last film, The Invisible Man, I found to be a really interesting sort of reboot of the Universal Monster classic, especially sort of reimagined for like this modern like tech bro sort of milieu, and how it mixes that sort of sci-fi premise with the more grounded kind of like giallo, like gaslighting thriller elements, especially with Elizabeth Moss's performance. I think works really well. And with this film, he is returning to the idea of remaking a Universal monster film, this of course being the 1941 Wolfman. But I would say as far as that film goes, he's really only taking the basic premise of like, yes, this is a werewolf movie, sort of inspired by that. This follows a father played by Christopher Abbott, who finds out that his father, who went missing in the woods years ago, has been declared deceased. So he and his family return to his childhood home in Oregon to collect his belongings, only to be hunted by the Wolfman creature that his father was obsessed with. I have to say right off the bat, I've been pretty perplexed with sort of how negative the reactions to this film have been so far. Not because it's a great movie or anything, I mean there's plenty of flaws which I'll get into, but I don't know, my wife and I both thought this was pretty good, just sort of the most like 3-star movie ever, totally enjoyable. I guess I'll start out with some of the issues I had with the film, which do echo some things I've heard from other critics. I do think the film's pretty clumsy in the way that it deals with its central ideas and themes. I think because of that opening like flashback sequence that you have at the very beginning of the film with the father and the son who goes on to be the Christopher Abbott character, you know very quickly that this is going to be one of those like modern horror movies where it's like where the themes are very clearly like sort of like familial trauma and the idea that you can't escape your heritage. Something like Ari Aster's Hereditary, for example, but I think this is a kind of a much lesser version of something like that. And, this would be totally fine if the film has layers to it, but it really doesn't. It just kind of like sticks with that central idea and doesn't really expand it too much. Like the bulk of the film, which is set with Abbott and his wife and daughter, pretty blatantly uses werewolfism and the change that comes with that, the trauma it brings, to sort of like be a metaphor for the trauma that he is worried about bringing to his own daughter. It's a neat idea, I think, and there's plenty of werewolf movies that have done things like that, but I don't know, I just don't think it goes very deep with it. Narratively as well, I also think the way the film positions the twist of the movie is pretty stupid. Like, you can see it coming a mile away once, like the minute you start to think about what the film is about, like on a more deep and thematic level, it's pretty clear as day what they're going to do with it. It would have been one thing to sort of have that detail exist in the film in general, but it's another thing when the film itself does actually like treat it like a twist, this big thing that's supposed to surprise you. The other major issue I have with the film is one where I'm sort of comparing it to the original a little bit, and I did get a chance to catch up with the 1941 original right before, basically the night before I went to see this. I just think that this sort of like tragic romance angle that they take in that 40s film, with this sort of somewhat, charming but also kind of creepy guy who spots this woman from like his telescope at his house and kind of courts her that way. I just think that's a much better vehicle for, werewolfism and sort of the primal themes that you have to get into than the sort of like very bare bones like Blumhouse family drama that they end up going with in this remake. And like, sure, the original is a Hays Code production, and so you're not going to get like the crazy psychosexual images and stuff that you would get in like a modern adaptation of this. But I really love how Lon Chaney's performance in that film, like you really, he does so much with so little in terms of like what he's allowed to work with the Hays Code and everything, but you really do get like that sort of sexual repression that his character clearly has, and how that slowly comes out as he starts to transform into the Wolfman. It does the primality of a werewolf movie really well. And with Whannell's film, I think that the issue is that not only are the themes different, but the sort of more naturalistic approach to the acting, as compared to like Lon Chaney in that movie, I just don't think sells like the yeah, the primality, or certainly like the tragedy. Like the original is a very sad film in a lot of ways, especially the way it ends up. It's this sort of like gothic, you know, tragedy horror film. And I don't really think the performances, just the way that they're allowed to exist in this, it has to be sort of in our like modern thriller language. I just don't know if it works as well in selling the tragedy. Like the conclusion that the characters face is really devastating, but you just don't feel it as much. So those are my issues with the film, and I've heard a lot of really like, you know, similar, what I think are pretty reasonable comments and critiques about the film. But overall, I was just really surprised with like how negative the reaction was to this, how like violently negative it was. Just as with his other two features, I think this is exceptionally well directed by Whannell. There's so many sequences where he uses the camera to sort of misdirect audience expectations about, you know, just using our sort of horror and thriller language about where the scare might be coming from next. He'll sort of pan for a while, like go right to left, and then start to go in the other direction, and you think that's where the scare is going to come from, and then it's, you know, nothing happens, and it just kind of leaves you on edge until a couple minutes later when you've sort of relaxed, and then he hits you right with the scare. And I think the way that these scares work in the film is designed more to work for, you know, audience members who are horror fans, thriller fans, people who are very used to this kind of thing, and, you know, have gotten a little bit tired of like the stale standard way these are usually directed, and is trying to mix it up a little bit. So I can always appreciate that, especially in a Blumhouse film when, you know, these are usually like the most kind of standard, you know, like run-of-the-mill horror movies you get. I also just love all of the sequences, you know, outside the house at night. So both you have like the Wolfman trying to break into the house in different ways, and kind of the way that they play with sound and noise and that and everything, but also the way that, you know, when the family is outside the house for a couple different sequences. I love when they're trying to get back in the house, like sort of when they're being chased by him. I don't know, the way those chase sequences are directed, you know, they're trying to get the door open and all that. It just reminds you of like you're a little kid and you're, you know, just turned off the lights in the basement. You're running upstairs, just hoping the monsters don't get you. With these sort of like action type sequences, I don't think Whannell does as much as I would like him to with sort of action filmmaking in a sense. I mean, I think he does. There are some fight sequences in the film between Christopher Abbott and the Wolfman, but I think those are really well directed for the most part. You do get a sense of his action sensibilities, but you don't really get like the stuff you'd see in Upgrade or even The Invisible Man, where you have like, again, like these sort of whip camera movements that to me really are like the thing that shows off his style the best. It does have a little bit of that with, there's times where during these fight sequences, reminds me a little bit of how the fight sequences in James Wan's Malignant are directed, where, I don't know, it almost seems like the camera's kind of floating, like it is like mathematically like tracking the characters, but it's very like uneven and kind of always shifting. I also really love the body horror in the film, you know, more than trying to like outdo something like American Werewolf in London, that, you know, incredible like 2-minute transformation sequence. I like how this tries to keep it more gradual and kind of in line with the original film, but unlike in that film, you get so much more gross detail in this one, of course. You have all of the, you know, sort of like body cracking and things like that. You have, you know, a sequence where he's basically like ripping his fingernails off. He's got teeth falling out. Just all this sort of gross detail that, of course, you wouldn't get in, you know, the original 1941 Wolfman. But it has that same spirit of like trying to be gradual with the transformation, which I definitely appreciated, especially after watching the original before this. I don't know. Overall, I just thought this was a pretty well done, you know, horror thriller sort of creature feature, I guess. You know, like there's definitely some issues with the writing, as there often is in these kind of films. And from what I've heard about the production history, it does sound like, you know, this was not exactly a passion project for Leigh Whannell. I think he has other things he's looking forward to a little bit more. But I don't know. I still thought he had the sauce with it when it came to the directing, and that just made the experience really enjoyable for me. And, you know, like from scene to scene, I was pretty engaged. So I'm gonna give this film 3 stars. You know, pretty strong 3, honestly. I don't think I could see it really going up for me on a rewatch very much. Again, there's like very clear issues with it, and I get why some people don't like it, but yeah, for me this worked well, and I think it's kind of underrated. Anyway, that's the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this, please like the video down below and subscribe to the channel if you're new. I've got more videos like this coming out soon and some live streams as well, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.